There's a lake in Alaska where people have been watching something rise out of the water for more than 80 years. Not a handful of times, dozens of times. Bush pilots have seen it, wildlife biologists have seen it. In 1988, a crowd of 17 people stood on the shore and watched dark shapes break the surface together. No one has ever caught it, no one has a clear photo, and no one has proven it isn't real. By the end of this story, you'll understand why that question has stayed open for 8 decades, and why the mystery is bigger than the monster. The lake is called Iliamna. It sits in the far southwest of Alaska, a region so empty that most people will only ever see it from the window of a small plane. There are no roads you would want to drive. The nearest towns are tiny villages with names most Americans have never heard. And the lake is enormous. It is the largest lake in Alaska, stretching nearly 80 miles from end to end. Its surface covers more than 1,000 square miles. To see that in your head, think of a body of fresh water almost as big as the state of Rhode Island. Size alone is impressive, but depth is what matters for this story. In places, the floor of Iliamna drops nearly 1,000 feet straight down. That is about 3 football fields of open water, stacked on top of each other. Much of that underwater world has never been surveyed at all. The lake even has its own volcano. Mount Iliamna rises more than 10,000 feet over the region, an active volcano that steams and occasionally rumbles. It is not a threat to the water itself, but it is a reminder that this corner of Alaska sits on a young, violent, barely settled landscape, where the ground is still forming. The water itself hides whatever is below. Glaciers feed the lake with meltwater full of fine ground rock. Tannins from the surrounding tundra stain everything the color of strong tea. A few feet below the surface, visibility drops to almost nothing. Something could swim right past you down there, and you would never see it coming. This is not just a weird patch of water. It is one of the most important wild places on the planet. Lake Iliamna feeds the Kvichak River, which flows into Bristol Bay. That bay produces the largest salmon runs on Earth. Every summer, millions of sockeye salmon pass through or spawn around Iliamna. The lake is a nursery for one of the last great wild fisheries left. People have lived beside this water for a very long time. The Dena'ina people have called this region home for generations. Their oldest stories mention a danger in the lake, something powerful in the water that deserves respect. Those stories were told long before any outside visitor wrote down a single word about the place. By the time the first written sightings appeared, the lake already had a reputation. It even had a nickname. Newspapers and locals started calling the creature Ili. Nobody knows who invented that name. But over 80 years later, people are still using it. A legend that survives that long is doing something right. To understand why Ili has lasted, you have to look at the witnesses. That is where this story gets strange, because the people who report the monster are not tourists, thrill seekers, or people hoping to get famous. They are exactly the people you would trust to describe an animal correctly. Start with the first written report, because it came from a man who made his living with his eyes. Bush pilots in Alaska are a particular breed. They fly alone, in brutal weather over some of the most dangerous terrain on Earth. Their lives depend on reading the land and the water correctly, every single time. The year was 1942. World War II was raging, and Alaska was a quiet backwater where fuel and supplies moved by small aircraft. A bush pilot was flying over Lake Iliamna when he saw something in the water below. He described it as a huge animal moving beneath the surface. It was big enough to stop him cold. To understand how strange this is, remember how empty this part of Alaska was back then. There were no roads into the region, no research stations watching the water. The only people who saw the lake regularly were the ones flying over it or fishing it. The written record of what lives in Iliamna is thin, and that thinness is part of the problem. We are trying to solve a mystery with a handful of reports spread across 8 decades. Think about who that pilot was. In that era, in that terrain, his whole career rested on reading the physical world correctly. A misjudged stretch of water or ice was not an abstract mistake. It could kill him. A man who built a reputation on split-second visual judgment does not casually claim to see a monster. There is no reward for that kind of story in a small aviation community. There is only risk. That does not make his account proof of anything. People can be wrong, even skilled people. But it does mean that dismissing him means assuming an experienced professional made a serious, sustained mistake in front of a witness in a community where that kind of claim carried real social cost. That is a heavier assumption than it sounds like. The reports kept coming. In 1963, a biologist with the Alaska Fish and Game Department reported seeing a large animal in the lake. He estimated it at 25 to 30 feet long, swimming just beneath the surface. Again, think about the witness. His actual job was identifying animals accurately. That is the whole profession. When a man like that says he saw something he could not name, it is worth listening to. That 1963 report is worth sitting with for a moment. The biologist was on the lake doing normal field work. He was not looking for anything strange. The animal surfaced, moved through the water in a way that made him stop and watch, and then disappeared. 25 to 30 feet is not a guess about a ripple. That is a size estimate made by a man who measured animals for a living. And then came the part he could not explain. He never saw it again, and no one he told could offer a name for it. In 1977, a pilot named Tim LeFiore was flying a route he had flown many times before. He saw two dark shapes rising toward the surface. Each one looked roughly 30 feet long. Behind them, a line of humps rolled through the water. LeFiore said the sight reminded him of an old illustration of a sea serpent. He considered the obvious explanation himself. Maybe they were whales. Then he ruled it out. Lake Iliamna is fresh water, more than 70 miles inland from the ocean. The only connection to the sea is a long, winding river system. For a whale to show up there, it would have to travel an incredibly unlikely path and survive in water that is completely wrong for it. So closed the loop on that one. A pilot flying a familiar route in daylight, describing two coordinated shapes with a trained eye, rejecting the easy answer before anyone else could. What was he actually looking at? That question went unanswered for years. And the next great report would not come from the air at all. But the strangest part of this story is not the sightings from the sky. It is what happened when real money got involved. Because by 1979, the reports had piled up so high that the mystery stopped being folklore. It became a target. That year, a newspaper in Anchorage made an announcement that turned Lake Iliamna's monster into a national story. The Anchorage Daily News offered $100,000 to anyone who could prove the creature existed. A clear photograph, a specimen, anything that settled the question. The reward was real. It was genuinely on the table. And people came. Real expeditions traveled to the lake, some carrying sonar, the machines that use sound waves to map what lies underwater. Others brought hydrophones, which are basically microphones built to listen underwater. They scanned the depths. They listened. They waited. By some accounts, at least one expedition tried something different entirely. They reportedly set up loudspeakers and played classical music into the water, hoping the sound would lure the creature up to the surface. Picture that for a second. A team of serious people on one of the wildest lakes in North America, serenading a possible monster with symphonies. It did not work, but it tells you exactly how much public excitement that reward created. What did the expeditions actually find? By the accounts that survived, some crews came back with recordings of sonar returns that were large and hard to explain, nothing they could call proof, nothing a skeptic had to take seriously, but also nothing that ruled a large animal out. The lake gave them echoes instead of answers and then closed back over its own silence. The reward was never claimed. No specimen. No photo clear enough to end the debate. By the standard the newspaper itself set, every serious attempt to prove Ili's existence failed. But here is the twist. That failure did not produce a clean answer either. Nobody proved the monster real. Nobody proved it impossible. And that is the heart of why this story has stayed alive for more than 80 years, while most local legends quietly die. Add up the obstacles to searching this lake and the picture gets clearer. The lake freezes solid for months every winter. Summer storms roll in off the Bering Sea without warning. The water is so dark that cameras and divers are nearly useless past a few meters. And the lake is enormous, which means any search is a needle hunt in a haystack the size of a small state. Most of Iliamna has simply never been looked at in any systematic way. Alongside the eyewitness accounts, there are the reports that are harder to wave away. Over the years, commercial fishermen have described nets coming up severed cleanly, as if cut with a blade, rather than torn or snagged. A few boat owners have reported deep gouges in their hulls below the waterline, in places far too deep for a rock or a reef to reach. Be honest about what these are. They are stories told by real people, collected over decades, but never examined by a formal research body. Nobody has ever bagged a severed net as evidence. A skeptic can name a dozen boring causes for a cut net or scraped hull, from underwater debris to simpleware. That is a fair point. And yet, the same kinds of reports keep appearing from different people in different years with nothing to connect them. When a legend carries that much independent weight for that long, it stops being easy to dismiss. Which brings us to the event in 1988 that still anchors this entire case. Imagine that summer afternoon. A group of people are out on the shore of Iliamna, families enjoying the water, not a single one of them looking for monsters. Somewhere out on the lake, the surface breaks. Not once. Multiple shapes moving together, 200 yards from where they stand. That is about the length of 2 football fields. People point, people count. Later, when the reports are gathered, the number most often cited is 17. That number matters more than any single story. One tired witness can mistake a floating log for a creature. 17 people standing together watching the same stretch of water at the same moment, describing the same event. That is a different kind of evidence. It still is not physical proof. But group sightings like this are genuinely rare in cryptid folklore, a word for creatures that people report, but science has not confirmed. Even researchers who stay skeptical of Ili point to 1988 as the strongest single testimony in the whole case. So where does that leave the question? 80 years of reports, a crowd of 17, professional witnesses, unexplained sonar echoes, and still no specimen, no photo, no proof. That is the paradox at the center of this story, and it deserves a closer look. Stop here for a second and take the whole picture in. The strongest evidence for Illy is a crowd of 17 ordinary people who all describe the same thing. The strongest evidence against it is that nobody has ever produced a body or a clear photograph. Both of those statements are true. Neither one settles anything. Here's the part that almost nobody talks about. Set the monster aside for a moment and look at the lake. Lake Iliamna is the largest lake in Alaska. It is nearly 1,000 feet deep in places. Huge stretches of its floor have never been mapped. And the honest, uncomfortable truth is that no one has ever searched this lake properly. Not once. Not ever. Think about what that means. The legend of the Loch Ness Monster has been investigated for nearly a century, with sonar sweeps, submarines, and teams of scientists. Lake Champlain's monster, Champ, has drawn the same kind of attention. Iliamna got a newspaper reward, a few small expeditions, and a lot of stories. In terms of real scientific scrutiny, it barely even got started. So the true state of the case is not that scientists looked and found nothing. It is that scientists have never really looked. That is a meaningfully different situation. And it changes what the mystery means. This is not a case where people studied the evidence and declared it empty. This is a case where the evidence was never collected in the first place. Now the 1988 sighting comes into focus because it is the closest thing this story has to a rock to stand on. 17 witnesses, daylight, multiple animals moving together, close enough to shore that people could count them. That is the peak of the entire case. And even that peak is just words. No film, no sample, no measurable trace, just a group of people, a stretch of water, and a story they all told the same way. Sit with how strange that is. In an age when everyone carries a camera, the best evidence for an 80-year mystery is a memory. The lake gave those 17 people a show, and then it took the evidence back. Water keeps no fingerprints. Picture what a real search would take. The water is too dark for cameras beyond a few feet. Divers cannot see in it. Sonar can map the floor, but a single pass over a 1,000-square-mile lake takes weeks. The lake freezes in winter, when equipment would actually be easy to haul onto the ice, but then the animals, people report, are gone from the surface. Every season fights you. Every tool goes blind. That is why the expeditions that did come, the ones chasing the $100,000, came home with echoes instead of answers. Some crews reported returns on their sonar that were too large to explain away as schools of fish. But sound in water lies. It bends. It bounces. A sonar image of a large shape is not a photograph of a creature. It is a shadow at the edge of what we can measure. And yet, the same thing keeps happening. People go to Iliamna expecting to close the case. They scan, they listen, they wait. And the lake gives them just enough to stay curious and never quite enough to know. That pattern, repeated across 8 decades, is its own kind of evidence. Not evidence of a monster. Evidence of a question that refuses to die. Now bring back the crowd on the shore in 1988 and pay attention to how they reacted. By the accounts we have, they did not panic. They did not run. They watched, they pointed, they tried to make sense of what they were seeing. A group of people standing together, sharing the same impossible sight, is one of the most persuasive things a human testimony can produce. It is also one of the easiest to dismiss because it leaves no trace. So here is where the case actually stands, and it is worth saying slowly. Nobody has proven Illy exists. Nobody has proven Illy does not exist. After more than 80 years, that honest, unglamorous uncertainty is the entire scientific position. There's nothing tidy about it, and that is exactly why it matters. Because in a world full of manufactured mysteries, this one does not need a single exaggerated detail to stay unresolved. The facts as they stand are enough. A huge, dark, barely explored lake. Credible witnesses across generations. A real reward that went unclaimed. And 2 plausible animals that could explain part of the picture, but not all of it. So which is it? Shark, sturgeon, or something else? To answer that, we have to look at the animals that actually live in and around these cold northern waters. And the deeper we look, the stranger the answers get. Start with the shark. The Pacific sleeper shark is a real animal, and it is a serious candidate. These are large, slow-moving sharks that live in cold northern water. In the open ocean, they can reach sizes well beyond 20 feet. Some researchers estimate the largest ones could push past 23 feet, longer than a city bus. Here's the part that makes them interesting for this case. Sleeper sharks are known to tolerate low salinity, which means water with very little salt. In some documented cases, they have been found in shallow, brackish places far from the open sea. A lake connected to the ocean through a long river system is not a comfortable home for a shark, but it is not an impossible one either. And remember what Lake Iliamna is. It is the nursery for the biggest salmon run on Earth. Every summer, millions of fish pour through that river system, and a slow-moving, scavenging shark does not need to hunt. It can follow a food source so enormous that finding a meal is almost automatic. If a sleeper shark wanted to spend a season in Iliamna, the pantry would never run out. But the theory has problems, and honesty requires naming them. First, after decades of searching, including expeditions built specifically to catch one, nobody has ever pulled a sleeper shark out of Lake Iliamna. Second, sleeper sharks are mostly solitary hunters. The witnesses in 1942 and 1988 described several large shapes moving together, appearing to coordinate. A pack of sleeper sharks is not something the science really supports. In 2016, a biologist named Bruce Wright ran a dedicated expedition targeting exactly this idea. He set baited hooks and cameras in the lake, looking specifically for a sleeper shark. The expedition did not produce a conclusive result. No confirmed shark, no clean photograph. Just another long look into dark water that kept it secret. Now the second candidate, and it looks like something out of a prehistoric age. The white sturgeon is a real fish that can live more than 100 years. It comes from an ancient family that swam the oceans alongside the dinosaurs. Large adults can grow past 20 feet long, with rows of hard, bony plates called scutes running down their backs. Those plates look like a ridged, armored spine breaking the surface. To a witness on the water, that silhouette could absolutely read as a line of humps, like an old drawing of a sea serpent. Sturgeon also move between fresh and salt water. They are documented travelers in river systems connected to the Pacific, which fits Lake Iliamna's geography far better than a whale ever did. If you want a scientific explanation for a serpentine shape with a ridged back in a big northern lake, sturgeon is the strongest name in the room. But the sturgeon has the same wall to run into. No confirmed specimen has ever come out of Iliamna, and some of the largest size estimates in the witness reports run bigger than any sturgeon ever recorded anywhere in the world. A 40-foot sturgeon is a museum piece, not a routine sighting. The fit is good, and then it stops being good exactly where the evidence stops adding up. There are smaller explanations too. They deserve fairness. Lake Iliamna holds some of the biggest lake trout on Earth, heavyweight fish that can push past 40 pounds. A big trout surfacing fast could surprise anyone. Beluga whales, which are white and unmistakable, have been recorded wandering unusually far up rivers elsewhere in Alaska. And then there's the simplest option of all: logs, waves, and tricks of light on cold, dark water, seen by people who already half expect a monster. That last one deserves more respect than it usually gets. The human brain is a pattern machine. Give it a shape half seen at water level, a dark surface, a legend everyone has heard, and it will happily stitch them together into a monster. The landscape itself primes you. The Denaina stories, the newspaper reward, the nickname Illy. By the time a visitor stands on that shore, the lake has already told them what they are about to see. Expectation is a powerful filter, and it works on honest people too. But here's the strange part, and it cuts both ways. Expectation explains why one person might see a monster. It struggles to explain why 17 people describe the same shape at the same moment. It struggles to explain why a biologist who measures animals for a living comes up with the same size estimate as a pilot 40 years earlier. Skeptics are right that the mind shapes what we see. They are less right when they pretend the mind is the whole story. And consider what the witnesses were actually describing, because the details matter more than the drama. They never describe flippers, a head with eyes, or a creature rising fully out of the water. Again and again they describe the same thing: a long, dark back, a rolling line of humps, a shape moving fast just under the surface. That consistency is precisely what both the sturgeon and the sleeper shark could produce. A back is all a witness would ever see in that water. Now the honest middle ground. The physical reports, the severed nets and the gouged hulls, sit exactly between the two camps. They are not confirmed forensic evidence. Nobody ever cataloged them properly. A cut net has a dozen boring explanations, but the reports recur across decades from independent people, and they refuse to stop. That is not proof of anything. It is a reason to keep the question open. And this is where real science enters the story, with a tool that could actually settle it. It is called environmental DNA, or eDNA for short. Every living thing sheds tiny traces of itself into the water around it. Skin cells, waste, mucus. Those traces carry DNA, the genetic code that identifies a species. By sampling the water and reading the DNA in it, scientists can list every animal that has recently passed through a lake without ever seeing a single one. This is not science fiction. It is a standard tool in conservation biology now, used to find rare and hidden species all over the world. In 2018, a team led by geneticist Neil Gemmell at the University of Otago ran a large eDNA survey of Loch Ness in Scotland. Their goal was simple: read the water and see what is actually in it. The result got worldwide headlines. The lake's DNA matched known species only. No unknown giant reptile, no monster. Just a lot of eels, and a mystery that quietly deflated. Now, here is the detail that should stop you. No one has ever done that test on Lake Iliamna. No published environmental DNA survey of the lake exists. No peer-reviewed study has found trace DNA from an unidentified large animal there, and none has found evidence that rules one out. The tool that helped settle the most famous lake monster case on Earth has simply never been pointed at this lake. So, compare the two cases honestly. Loch Ness, nearly a century of sonar sweeps, submarines, scientific teams, and finally a full DNA survey, and it came up empty. Iliamna, a newspaper reward, a few small expeditions, decades of credible sightings, and no serious survey at all. The famous monster got the full scientific treatment and lost its magic. The obscure one never got examined at all, which is exactly why it is still a mystery. That contrast is the whole lesson of this story, and it changes how you should read every sighting. When a case is investigated and comes up empty, that is a result. When a case is never investigated, emptiness means nothing. Iliamna's mystery is not solved. It is not even tested. There's a real difference between those two things, and most discussions of this lake blur them. It is possible, of course, that the truth is even simpler. Maybe the reports are a mix of everything. A sturgeon here, a big trout there, a log and a trick of light somewhere else, and a legend doing what legends do, organizing all of it into one story. Real mysteries are rarely tidy. They are usually a pile of ordinary parts wearing a dramatic coat. But keep this in your head, because it is the reason the question is worth keeping open. Nobody has ruled anything out, not the shark, not the sturgeon, not even the idea that something in that lake does not fit our records. The evidence is thin, sure, but in this case, thin evidence is a symptom of no investigation, not a sign that investigation would fail. You cannot declare a mystery empty in a place you have never searched. The legend's pull even reached beyond Alaska. The television series River Monsters, hosted by biologist Jeremy Wade, dedicated an episode to the Iliamna reports, applying the same methodical approach the show used on cases it actually solved elsewhere in the world. That kind of sustained attention, from a 1979 newspaper reward to a modern documentary series, is itself part of why Ili never faded into purely local memory. So where does that leave the legend of Ili? 80 years in, the honest answer is the same place it has always been: open. And there is something worth respecting in that, because most mysteries do not survive this long. They collapse under the weight of checking. And when someone actually looks, the monster usually turns out to be a log, a hoax, or a story that was never real to begin with. Iliamna's monster survived exactly that kind of scrutiny. Skeptical journalists looked into it, paid expeditions, chased real reward money looking for it. A television crew built to test exaggerated claims came looking for it. The legend came through all of it, not proven, but also not disproven, still resting on credible witnesses who had no reason to lie. The curse of this lake is logistics. It is too big, too dark, too cold, too far away. The same features that protect the mystery make it genuinely hard to solve. And that is not a conspiracy, it is geography, doing what geography does. And maybe that is the real story here, bigger than any creature. A lake the size of a small state, at the heart of the world's greatest salmon run, has not been properly explored in the year 2026. Think about what that says about our planet. We can photograph galaxies billions of light years away. We have rovers driving on Mars, and a body of fresh water right here on Earth, and one of the most productive ecosystems that exists, is still holding secrets we have never measured. If a team with enough money and enough time went to Iliamna with the right tools, what might they find? A closed case and a boring explanation probably. Maybe a sturgeon after all, or a sleeper shark that wandered in and stayed. But here's the thing about that outcome. Even a boring answer would be a discovery because it would finally tell us what is really down there. And if they found nothing, interesting even then, because an empty lake that feeds the biggest salmon run on the planet is not empty. It is full of animals we already know, doing things we already understand, feeding a fishery that feeds millions of people. The mystery was never going to be the only amazing thing about this place. So the legend of Ili ends where it began, in the water unresolved. Whether the monster is real, a misread fish, or a story that grew with every telling, the question itself has done something remarkable. It has kept thousands of people looking at a wild, beautiful, barely explored corner of the world for 8 decades. A mystery that does that is doing real work, even if it is never solved. Someday, maybe, the lake will give up its answer. A camera, a DNA sample, a tagged fish that turns out to be something that was never supposed to be there. Until that day, Iliamna keeps its silence, and the question keeps its power. Some questions are worth keeping open, because they remind us how much of the world we still have not seen. Thanks for staying to the end of this one. If you have ever watched that lake from a plane or lived on its shores, I want to hear your side of this. And for everyone else, here is the question. Which witness would you trust, the bush pilot, the biologist, or the crowd of 17? Tell me in the comments, because that answer says a lot about how we decide what is real. If you want more stories about the real, documented mysteries hiding in remote corners of the world, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Exploreverse brings you a new one every week. See you out there. Title 1. The $100,000 reward nobody ever claimed on Lake Iliamna. Title 2. 17 witnesses, 1 lake, and an 80-year-old mystery title. 3. Alaska's lake monster. Why the scientists still can't crack it. One note on your working title, since it promises the monster was proven real, while this script ends on the opposite conclusion. YouTube viewers punish titles that overclaim, so I'd soften it to one of the options above, so the payoff matches the promise.